Senate Chamber. Signed. 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 Senate Chamber. signed, Senate Chamber, 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 signed, Senate Chamber. Signed. 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 Senate Chamber. signed,
This will just Oh. There we go, we're live now, Chair.
Thanks very much. So welcome members and the public to the 55th meeting of the Committee for Finance in this mandate. As always, the meeting's recorded, broadcast online in Parliament buildings. If you are in the gallery, please put your phone on silent or airplane mode. It's not permitted to take any photographs or recordings of this meeting. Item 1 is apologies. We don't have apologies, but we do have some members who have said they will be joining us on Zoom for all or part of the meeting. Okay. Agenda item 2 is declaration of interest. Members are obliged to declare any or all interests at the start of a hearing. Is there any interest to declare? No. Okay. Agenda item 3 is Chairperson's business. Now, first Chairperson's business is we're going to just have a discussion about a meeting, an informal private meeting that we had, and so just for the purposes of that, I'm giving people, I guess, a full view of it. We'll briefly go into closed session and then we'll go back into open session if members are content with that.
Sure, great.
And then we'll summarise any actions or any.
Go ahead, Stephen.
Senate Chamber, signed, 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 Senate Chamber. Sound. 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 Senate Chamber. signed, Senate Chamber, 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 signed, Senate Chamber. Sound. 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 Senate Chamber. Sound.
Picture back. Rule on the day when we control this ourselves. Oh, there we go, Chair.
Great, thank you. So, members, we're back in open session. We just had a discussion about the informal meeting that we had with the Secretary of State and his team, which was further to our many requests for structured evidence sessions from UK government representatives. It was a cordial meeting, and there were some useful discussions around a number of subjects, including the Public Sector Transformation Board in particular. We're going to write a letter. We've agreed we're going to write a letter thanking the Secretary of State and his team for their time, but restating I think our position, and I think there is a degree of sympathy, not to put words in their mouth, with this view that we should be able to call upon UK government representatives, in particular those from the Treasury, not regularly, not every week, but with some regularity or some degree of structure, to give us evidence, and frankly more than evidence, information to help us do our job in terms of understanding UK government perspective on things like the fiscal framework, or indeed when there's fiscal events. So we'll write that letter if members are content. Okay. The next item is a written statement from the Minister of Communities on the NI Community Infrastructure Fund. That's page 17 of the pack. The Communities Minister has announced the launch of a new community infrastructure grant scheme for the voluntary and community sector to refurbish and improve community buildings and facilities. It will initially be a pilot with £4 million, and it's starting for work to start in 26-27. So that's to note, unless anybody wishes to comment on it.
Wait, did we do 3.2 though? Yeah.
3.2.
3.2 is part of.
Oh, sorry. Can I just raise something on the ladder then? Just from the
yes, of course. Yeah, we'll just finish it. So members are happy enough with the Community Infrastructure Fund. We will go back to 3.2 on the Public Sector Transformation Board, which is something that we had discussed a little bit in closed session. But Mr. Brett, let's go ahead.
Thank you. So the first couple of points just was, it's good to see obviously that the Executive Chief Scientific and Technology Advisor is now on the board, but previously she was just in a part-time capacity. She's now heading up the Executive's AI unit, alongside also advising ministers. So I'm just wondering, has her position, given she now wears many hats, now become full-time given her recent appointments? I also just wanted to check in relation to some of the wording in the letter, which obviously if I need to I can follow up in a private matter, but point 9 on decision making for the Public Sector Transformation Board. So it said it will be for the Minister for Finance in consultation with executive colleagues to allocate funding. I'm just not sure of the definition of the word consultation. So does that mean that it requires executive approval, or the Minister can inform colleagues that they have made that funding allocations?
That's that question.
Okay.
Okay. Steve, do you wish to come in, Steve Aiken?
Yes, just to follow up from what Philip said, obviously with the Chief Scientific Advisor, because of her role and particularly how she's been very much central to the transformation process and also bringing in AI into government as well. I just want to re-emphasise maybe getting her come and give us evidence in the autumn. I think she's a breath of fresh air, and the more we hear for her and the more she's put into the central government role, the better.
Okay. Well, first of all, obviously, I'm sure your warm words about her are welcome. I hope she's not so good that she is taking on an unsustainable workload. I mean, that's unfortunate. It happens sometimes in organisations when people are deemed to be effective, that they take on more roles than one person should have. I'm not saying that's happening in this case, but she certainly is doing a lot, and it would be good, I'm sure, to hear from her at some point. Can I just suggest we look at the forward work programme? We give the clerks obviously a bit of a minute to breathe over the summer and think about our forward work programme in the autumn and when that would be appropriate. I think the best thing is, given we've got now 2 bills, tying up our banking inquiry, we've got the fiscal framework and we've got the civil service work, I do want to just be...
New budget cycle.
And new budget cycle. I just want to be realistic about everyone's workload and us doing proper scrutiny, mindful of what the Speaker said around legislation scrutiny. I don't want to be taking on additional oral briefings, even if they're interesting, but if they're not totally pertinent to our core committee work. I think we have to be judicious, frankly, about that. But I certainly will look at it. Okay, right. 3.4 is the Executive Office Committee inquiry into mother and baby institutions, Magnum laundries and workhouses and redress scheme bill. Page 19 of the meeting pack. The Executive Office Committee is undertaking the committee stage for the bill, which will make provision relating to truth recovery, public inquiry into mother and baby institutions, and payments for connected persons. As is normal protocol, the committee has been asked to comment on the bill, and members open to members to make any particular comments. I mean, I suppose I would open by saying this is a hugely welcome that this bill is happening. It is obviously a very dark period in the history of Ireland as an island, and welcome progress. I'm not aware of any institutions where there's a virus for the Finance Department and therefore the Finance Committee, but I suppose anybody who's watching this who thinks that there is and they wish our committee to feed back a view can get in touch with the committee. I'm not opening up more work, but I don't think there is any particularly direct read through to our scrutiny work, but I would broadly welcome the bill. I don't know if anybody else wishes to say anything. Jerry Carroll.
Yeah, broadly welcome the bill. I know there's some debate on how strong it is, but broadly welcome it. Maybe it's TEO, but in terms of the people who were in or family members were in institutions and moved or were forcibly moved to the States and Canada, I mean, it's probably not a case for the Washington NI Bureau office in Washington. Is that the name of it? So I don't know, but maybe if we get some advice on whether they can play a role, because there'll be people in America, I presume.
Right. These are people who have moved from here to the States, and is this about? Yeah,
whose mothers in particular were in institutions, and there's a gap in knowledge, and people may know their mother's history or they may not. So kind of what work is being done in America. Okay, it'd be difficult to reach everybody, but surely there'd be some work done by TO, you presume.
Certainly flag that.
If we can get clarity on that, rather than the Finance Committee doing that work.
I don't think it's work for us to do, but certainly it's a point we can raise.
If members are in agreement, I'll write to the TEO committee clerk just to make sure that they're.
Yes, I think that's a good point. I think it's a good idea to raise. Anybody else are content otherwise? Okay, right. So, grand, so we will do that, and then obviously any other comments, please, that occur to people, you can pass them on. Agenda 3.5 is oral statement in relation to the 24-25 provisional outturn and June monitoring. So that is at page 4 of the table pack. The Minister, obviously, as everyone's aware, made a statement on Monday the 30th of June about the 24-25 provisional outturn and 25-26 June monitoring. A copy of the statement was emailed to members on receipt, and we obviously discussed it in the Chamber on Monday. Just a couple of points which I suppose come out at me. One is, I think, the need for us to, there's quite a few bits in this. First of all, I think it's welcome to June monitoring in June, which was a good innovation, but anyway, it was good to see. A couple of things that occur to me. One that isn't in June monitoring, but I think it's important for us to understand, which is the potential A5 underspend, to be kept abreast of, I suppose, now the 181 million that was allocated in the 25-26 budget, to understand what's happening with that. And obviously some of that will be contingent on legal proceedings, but I would imagine it is now virtually impossible for that money to be spent in year, even if there was a sort of Hail Mary pass on the legal stuff, and I think I would certainly hope so. I would want to see this progress as quickly as possible, but just think we need to understand impact on finances. One other thing that struck me, having reread it, is there's the 24-25 outturn includes a £51 million underspend on FTC, which is, given that the UK government made great play of something which was welcome, which was giving £50 million to an FTC to build casement. There's a kind of sort of slightly coincidental kind of a £50 million underspend last year and a £50 million allocation this year. So I think it would be helpful if the department could say whether the Treasury is this genuinely new money from the Treasury, or are they just recounting an underspend from last year? I also think if there's an underspend from last year, have we asked the question about whether it could be used for other things, including other stadia, including meeting the balance of casement, and indeed there are other, obviously, sub-regional stadia. So I think understanding that £50 million underspend is going to be important. I think there is a question about whether the Treasury has just re-announced an underspend from last year in terms of FTC, it seems, and it's very important, obviously, because we need to see the stadium built as soon as possible. Two things which struck me, if any members comments. Philip, Brett.
Thank you, Chair. And it's just a point about presentation moving forward, and I know that officials obviously are under pressure to get this out, but the way in which this is presented in terms of bids and then allocations is very, very difficult to follow, particularly given the short time period between the statement being made available to members and then trying to question the Minister on it. It would be useful if we could just they could produce a table in terms of the bids made and then the bids met, because the bids made and then the line on the bids met don't even correlate with each other. So if you look at DFI, for example, there are a lot of bids that were made for Northern Ireland Water, and then when you turn to the allocations, the line just reads water. So so I have literally no idea what that allocation is for, and maybe it's just me because I'm a new member of this committee, but I just struggled to go between pages.
I think it should be. We should be able to read this stuff across relatively quickly, particularly when we get very short notice. I think there is a question there about water. I also think it's worth saying, and say this in a not necessarily chair of the committee, but the argument is that the funding situation with NI Water is sort of okay. Then we need to understand whether that the allocation in June monitoring is sufficient. But I also think we do need to understand about the presentations so the members understand it. Steve Aiken.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just the issue of FTC. You will have heard me raise the issue with the Minister when we were questioning when the statement came through. I would just like a bit more clarity from the department on why the Treasury has allowed us to treat FTC the way they have in the Minister's statement, because previously they didn't. And I just don't want us to end up sort of working on the assumption that we can do that with FTC every year. I would just like a sort of a formal statement that it's been an agreed process.
What do you mean when you say? Do you mean
the way that sort of the FTC has been used to the underspend in FTC stand fast? I think it was about 1.3 million or 1.4 million that was being carried forward, which is all allowed to be carried forward, was being allowed to be used to act as a down payment on the FTC that already been paid out. Now, previously, we weren't allowed to do that. FTC either had to be spent or it had to be returned. So I'm not quite sure how the Treasury has agreed that, or is there some other way that it's being accounted for?
It was always the case that FTC, if you didn't spend FTC, you were allowed. It would be used to reduce future liabilities. No.
No, it wasn't. Previously, it wasn't. So I just wanted sort of some clarity on that. I'd actually be very happy if that was the case, Chair. I think that would be an excellent use of it. If we can't spend it, it's used to pay down the liabilities, but I'm not quite sure that previously that was the case.
Okay. If I'm sure the clerk can crystallise that point. I'm not entirely sure if I understand it. So we will ask about that. And yes, about, I think, this question about the 50 million allocation that was announced from the Treasury with I think, a broad welcome, not from everybody, I accept that, but I'm certainly welcome and want to see Casement Park built. But it's slightly intrigued as to whether the Treasury is simply counting an underspend from last year as an allocation to Casement, and whether we can use the underspend of FTC from last year for other things as well, including, I would say, meet the balance of Casement and look at other regional stadia. But that would be for the executive to decide. So I just want clarity on those two numbers, because there is a parallel there. Steve Aiken's point about the carry forward, and Philip Rett's point about formatting. Okay, if members are content.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay. The next agenda item is 3.6, which is freedom of information requests during the summer. So members, it's standard practice to delegate authority to the chairperson or deputy chairperson during the recess to submit views on the releasing or withholding of information in non-routine or contentious FOI requests. Are members content? Is that the case?
Thank you.
Okay. Agenda item 4 is draft minutes of the meeting held on the 25th of June. Members, at page 93 of the meeting pack, there are draft minutes. Are members content that I sign the draft minutes? Any comments on them?
Right, Chair.
Okay. 5 is matters arising. Agenda item 5. These are a series of DALO readout responses. There's only one, and that it relates to the Data Use and Access Act as it is now. The committee held an additional meeting, says page 104. The committee held an additional meeting with the Permanent Secretary on the 10th of June, following which members agreed to request further information on a number of issues relating to this proposed LCM. The Department has responded, providing the wording of the motion debated on the 30th of June, which we've already debated and it wasn't passed, noting the passage in Royal Assent for the Data Bill, or Act as it is now. A copy of the correspondence from the Finance Minister to Executive colleagues, 9th of May, page 105, submission to the Finance Minister, 12th of June, at page 114, regarding an amended LCM, comments on engagement between the DOF and the Department of Science, Innovation, Technology, and details of an LCM tracker. The Department has also stated that it has been liaising with TO to ascertain whether there's a need for updated guidance and training for officials. Legal advice has not been provided. However, it is indicated that DSO accepted the devolution analysis provided by DCIT. Furthermore, the Department undertook its own analysis of Article 2 Windsor Framework implications through DSO within 3 areas where the LCM process was engaged, resulting in broad agreement with the UK Government's assessment that the bill is compliant with Article 2.1 of the Windsor Framework in these areas. Finally, in response to the committee's question about a consultation with the Attorney General in respect of precedent set, the Department has indicated that it will refer this matter to TO for consideration. I think our primary action arising from this is probably, first of all, I think we all made our views clear in terms of the debate on the 30th. In fairness to the Minister and his officials, first of all, the officials did not, the officials were up front whenever, that's not a total plain mitigation, but we acknowledge the fact that they were, that they acknowledged the mistake, as did the Minister in the Chamber. But I do think this is something for TO to maybe take forward, and for us to be, make the point that there is clearly a I think, if we're absolutely honest, a deficit in knowledge about the legislative consent process, and I think that includes MLAs, if I'm absolutely honest, and clearly the UK government as well. So I would suggest that we write this to either the TO committee or TO itself, maybe both, perhaps the TO committee, I suppose, in the first instance, and perhaps the Speaker's Office or Chairperson's liaison group to say...
Speaker's Office Chair, I know, our Business Office Chair are looking at this as an issue. They would generally be the ones who keep us on the right track as effectively guardians of standing orders. Yeah. So I know they've been monitoring this quite closely. I think the Speaker's got further plans as well.
Well, it would be helpful, I suppose, just for us to be kept abreast of that for information, given we have been the canary in the coal mine on this one, and any other use we can be in terms of the experience or of this failed LCM process. We should basically send everything to TO committee and the Speaker's Office and flag that we are happy to provide any more information and insight into that, and would be like to, I think, kept abreast of any developments in that regard for our own information. Diane, for sure.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just in terms of the tracker, it was mentioned, and I know it was mentioned centrally. I wonder, has there been any update in terms of Department of Finance, because there wouldn't be, so many specific to them, and it was mentioned in the debate about, our committee clerk team chasing it down before Christmas as well, otherwise we wouldn't have had any sight of anything. So I just commend the clerk team on even flagging that at that point. But I just wonder, in terms of us and our committee and watching the LCMs, where is the tracker? And for us here in this committee to be looking at the finance ones and pulling them out and keeping our own live tracker of Department of Finance LCMs just on our own agenda here, so that we all have eyes on it. Because I appreciate the Minister was saying everybody has a role here, but I do feel that it's under the Finance Minister's responsibility when it's his LCMs. But if there's any way we can have it, I think it would be good.
I think the clerk and secretary, I think there's sort of probably three parts to that. Number one, very important to say, our clerk, the reason we knew about this in the first place was that the clerk reached out to the department to ask. So I think it was right and proper for me to make that point on behalf of our clerks here, who work very hard to keep abreast of a vast array of information and stuff coming in and stuff that has to go out from the committee. I think our clerk team dispatched their responsibilities completely appropriately and effectively. Number two, I think there is a point about us doing as much as we can to keep abreast of any LCMs that are coming down the line. So I think we can ask the department to keep us, when they're keeping us in the loop in terms of the DALO of upcoming legislative moments, whether that's obviously primary, secondary, or LCMs, that we should add to that, and we should be asked to be kept abreast as regularly as possible of any developments. I say number three is probably that it kind of goes back almost to the very first conversation we had, which was about the Secretary of State engagement with the UK government. If the UK government is serious about improving devolution and being less kind of reckless about devolution than the bluntly the Tories were, then they need to be giving upfront information about this very, very swiftly.
Chair,
so for example, like Chris Bryan saying, yeah, that's all grand, that's being dealt with, was just clearly not true, basically, and he said that to Robin Swan in the House of Commons, and that wasn't right. So I think we do need to improve the processing. Anyway, yeah, sorry.
Chair, the intention is we'll start mapping this in our forward work programme. Generally, it's one of those things you do rely on the department to be the one that's involved in the process and tell you what's going on. But what we will do is, as soon as we get that information, Business Office would usually prompt us, if they've been prompted by Westminster, to ask the question if the department has engaged. So we'll start that as our point to apply it to our forward work programme, so that it will sit there and we can track just what's not happening or is happening. It's a tricky process. As Chair says, I think both sides, the UK government departments and also executive departments here, there is a lack of knowledge. There's a lot of staff have never come across an LCM before. And just to flag up again, I've agreed to meet the Departmental Board early August to talk about this from a standing orders perspective and what we do in a committee, and just to give them a better understanding of how that might work and where their role comes in. So yeah. we have new things in place, and that'll also give me a chance to look at what they're talking about in terms of a tracker from the perspective of how that works for the committee as well. Okay. So hopefully by September we'll have a much better picture of how this can be done in a different way.
Okay, grand. People have enough. Right. The next is an extract, or a DALO readout extract of a request made following our meeting on the 11th of June. And we have a series of them, and this is everything that arose out of the members out of the 11th of June. 5.4, it relates to the Motor Insurance Task Force. Members asked, it's page 125 of the meeting pack, members asked the Department for an update on a meeting between devolved ministers and the Motor Insurance Task Force. It is indicated that there is no longer such a meeting, but that the Secretary of State for Transport offered a bilateral meeting with the Minister for the Future of Roads. I didn't know that someone with such a bizarre job title existed, but anyway, at the Department of Transport to discuss local issues in relation to motor insurance. The Finance Minister has accepted an invitation to attend. So, members, this is just to seek agreement to send this update to the Infrastructure Committee. And just to say one thing about the devolved settlement that is good is we don't have to come up with ridiculous job titles for people that are, rather than anyway, that's the public-private opinion. 5.5 is the Public Sector Transformation Board. That's at page 126 of the meeting pack. The committee previously asked the department to crystallise its thinking about the use of the term board when referencing the Public Sector Transformation Board. Members also agreed to ask the department for its assessment of the approach to making appointments to the board in relation to RHI recommendations. As in the light of RHI recommendations, the Department has indicated that the language used was included by the British Government in the Executive Financial Restoration Package. It has also confirmed that the role of the board, this is a quote, is to provide expert advice to the Finance Minister. As such, appointments to the board are for the Finance Minister to make, with the exception of the British Government representative, so there's no requirement to run a public appointments competition. Does anyone wish to come in on that? Okay. 5.6 relates to baby loss certificates. The Department has again provided information in relation to charging for baby loss certificates, indicating that it expects there will be no charge when someone applies for a baby loss certificate, that this will be a matter for public consultation. DOF also indicates that the provision for charging is included in the bill in case it is needed in the future to allow it to levy a charge if required. This could be for someone requiring multiple copies of the certificate, for amendments to the certificate, for instance, the correction of any erroneous information supplied or the inclusion of further information previously omitted. It also reinforces that the bill requires that any charging would need to be set out in regulations, which in turn would need to be approved by the Assembly. I just think that's quite an important point to note at the end there. So any potential mechanism for charging for any reason subsequent to this bill being passed in primary form would need to be approved by the Assembly, but I acknowledge, and I would say, lots of people would say there should be absolutely no context in which there would ever need to be a charge, but the Department seem to think they want to build in the power. Jerry Carroll?
Yeah, it's a bit confusing, Chair, because it's like it's free, but, you know, so, and I think it goes against what we discussed at the committee a few weeks ago, down in the studios, which is Ulster Studios. Just give them a...
Yeah, this is the follow-up.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So I can't remember the time frame for amendments and stuff. So I'm not sure if the committee is willing to kind of amend that out of it. I'd be certainly keen to look at it as a private member. But yeah, it's kind of like the principle of it being free is the one that I think every member was agreeing on. But then the fact that there's also provision for charging, I think not only is principally not a good thing, but like I said before, it could cause really just upset with people who have been through a traumatic experience. So I don't think the committee should support that aspect of the bill.
I'm going to bring in Deirdre and Philip.
I think it's just to get more info. I mean, I think everybody would agree in principle that there shouldn't be a charge. And I'm wondering, but is there a reason that they have put it in terms of unintended consequences? So obviously they deal with a whole range of registrations, including death. So is this written into any of those regulations, and is there a need? So I think if we can just get as much information before we do make a decision or make amendments or anything like that, it would be useful.
And far from me to be the defender of the Minister, but in fairness to him, when he was making a statement on this in the House, he said, you know, his view is that copies will be available free of charge, but if you didn't have this regulation in, for example, not saying that this would happen, but someone could ring up and say, I want 5,000 copies of this. And they could do that. So it was to bring in a limitation that he didn't expect to be used, but it was important that it was in place.
I think that's fair enough. I think it is important to say that, as Jerry said, nobody wants this to be any charge, and I have to say I don't think that's what the Minister wants, or even the Department of Finance. It may be just a desire to build in some kind of theoretical limitation that would be infinitesimally unlikely to be used, but they believe it has to be there. I'll bring you in a second, Jerry. I think the best thing would be for us to, if the Department could crystallise that in as Deirdre says, by giving us a bit more of an example, slightly more detailed examples of the where they might want to. I think that would enable us to consider where we go and consider whether this is something that we should be concerned about. Jerry?
Of the bill in front of me, Chair, but I mean, would that not fall to the discretion of the Council in that sort of unlikely scenario that Philip and others are referring to? The Council could say, you know, no, or we'll look at that, or is there not a way of reframing it where in specific circumstances the Council can use its discretion? I think it may be an easier way of
well, I suppose that we can ask that question. I suppose the argument would be, if you're the people who are drafting the bill and the officials might be, look, if there is a theoretical situation in which someone is, for whatever reason, and by the way, there's going to be a very small number of people in terms of the whole population are going to be ever using this, and they're going to be in very tragic circumstances. If the department is building in just a potential theoretical regulatory insurance to prevent from some person using it for some vexatious reason, which I don't think is likely, but then it probably might be the case that the council might not have actually that flexibility, because if they're just, the council's just following the legislation, and if the legislation doesn't have a specific limitation, then they might not feel they have that discretion. I don't know, but anyway, we will ask those questions. Okay. People happy enough? Yeah. Happy enough? Okay, right. Next is we just need agreement. Oh yes. Yes, sorry. Members are agreed we will include the department's response and any other response we get subsequent on these points to the report on the bill in due course. I think it's just also worth saying again that any detail on the bill will be in regulations still not written, and this part of the regulations would be in draft affirmative. So even if this bill passed with this theoretical provision in it, there would then have to be regulations that would come to the Assembly which would spell out exactly the context in which anybody would have to pay, and the Assembly could then say, no, we don't think that is reasonable. So even if the bill passed in its current form, there would still have to be regulations brought to the Assembly that people could say yay or nay to. But I accept we should ask these questions. Okay, the next is relates to hydrogen hubs. That's at page 128 of the pack. The Department of Finance has provided information related to the hydrogen hubs project, High Tech NI, it's called, within the complementary fund. This project is jointly sponsored by Queen's University Belfast and Mid and East Antrim Borough Council, who are partnering with Ulster University to develop the project scope. The project sits within the remit of the Department of Economy, which is currently considering the draft outline business case. Members are agreed we will forward this information to the Economy Committee for its information. Agreed?
Agreed, Chair. 5.8
is follow-up information on the oral briefing we got on service delivery, and the service delivery brochure from IT. That's at page 130 of the meeting pack. The committee asked for some follow-up information after its oral briefing on digital operations and the IT aspects of the service delivery brochure. The department has provided figures in relation to the level of income paid by other departments and public bodies. Also provided are details of the gateway review reports, workflow and process. A sample gateway assurance review report template is provided starting at page 132 of the meeting pack. That's the note. Finance Department, the next bit is review of energy efficiency requirements and related areas of building regs. That's at page 147 of the meeting pack. The Department of Finance has provided a consultation report following a 20-week consultation on a discussion document reviewing energy efficiency requirements and related areas of building regulations. The technical consultation explored next steps on a range of interrelated areas. So I won't go into all the detail, but the technical detail in the booklet includes impact assessments in relation to changes in requirements on a whole range of building regulations, and we will be getting a fuller briefing at some stage when our work programme permits. Unless anybody wishes to say anything about it right now. 5.10 from the Department of Finance is a breakdown of early payment. Is a breakdown of early payment data by council area. So if members turn to page 160 of your pack, the department has provided that breakdown. It was requested by Paul Frew, and you can see the areas where there is more use of payment. It's just raw numbers. There isn't a kind of percentage of ratepayers there, but you could work it out yourself. Belfast is the highest, and Derry has the lowest. So that's to note. That's at page 160. 5.11 relates to the House of Lords Scrutiny Committee and the imposition of global reciprocal tariffs, implications for Windsor Framework and Northern Ireland. That's page 161. Committee has just been copied into correspondence from the Chair of the House of Lords NI Scrutiny Committee as a courtesy. I suppose you should declare it's not an interest, but I did give evidence, as others did, to that committee a couple of weeks ago in my party capacity. 5.12 is a report from the Fiscal Council on the UK Spending Review 2025, page 164. Fiscal Council has written to the committee with its assessment of the overall spending settlement for NI, both Barnett and non-Barnett, the NI premium methodology, and the estimates and the estimates of the premium for the SR period and other miscellaneous issues. Does anybody wish to raise anything or comment? Sorry, Deputy Chair, sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think this is really, really useful, and I wonder, are we sharing this with other committees? Because there's some specific items in particular in reference to some TEO, education, economy items, and it would be good for those committee members to have sight of it.
Yeah, I think that's really important, and I think obviously, as always, as with the previous bit of work done by the Fiscal Council in relation to the calculation of need, this will be useful for us. This response is going to be useful for us in terms of our scrutiny of the fiscal framework and Hotham going forward in the autumn. But yes, we should definitely share it with other committees. I think that's really, wise. We should say it with a kind of like, read this, don't just sort of think this is obscure geekery from the Finance Committee. It's actually interesting and important. Okay? Members are content? Yeah. Right, we're going to the table pack now. And this relates to, this is the budget 26 to 29/30 information gathering. Members, that's at page 35 of the table pack. The department has written to all departments seeking returns to inform the executive's consideration of budget 26 to 29/30, setting the resource budgets for 26-27 to 28-29 and capital budgets for 26-27 to 29/30. Detailed guidance and templates have been provided. Returns are due by the 4th of September to allow for a draft budget to be published by the autumn, followed by a 12-week consultation. It is indicated that this will allow a final budget to be agreed before the start of the financial year. So this is, I think, going to be one of the biggest things that detains us for the rest of our time. I think it's a good thing, first of all, that this information is being sought. Having called for multi-year budgets for a very long time, I would say it's important to acknowledge the fact that that the Finance Minister is now in a position to write out to departments asking to give them their returns. I think we'll want to seek an early evidence session on the process. I think there's a couple of initial questions which occur to me, one of which relates to how the fiscal framework strand of work interacts with this, i.e. is the department's aim to unlock greater funding for the, to basically say, well, we would like to have negotiated, for example, a slightly higher calculation of need for the end of this period, or are they running in parallel? Is there any interaction between the fiscal devolution work? Obviously, to be fair, the fiscal devolution work is part of the fiscal framework, but also how does it sit alongside the strategic income review, the budget sustainability work, and all of those bits around revenue raising and review of rates? I think it would be helpful to understand how those sit together. Would be interesting for me, but I think that's going to be really important. But it's going to be a priority for us among all the other priorities we have. But I think it is important to look at that later this year. But I actually do welcome the fact that the department is now in a position to write out, and I think we should be acknowledging that. Just bring anybody else who wants to come in. The Deputy Chair, yeah.
Yeah, thanks very much. And I think that it's really welcome to see this going out, and I think that it would be good whenever we're back in September, as soon as possible, if we're able to schedule in that meeting with the finance directors, because I think, as well as our wider points that we wanted to get together and speak to them about, it would be really good to hear how they all felt that this had gone, had the work together on it, and it'll also be interesting to see. I'm just skimming through the document here. I'm not sure, is there like, I can see they've got the tables and things there, and I would be interested to see how every department has used the template. Have they used it a similar way? Because as Philip has said, we had it in the June monitoring round return, we have it in the estimates, we have it in the budget, the inconsistency of format, and then for the Department of Finance to be able to pull it together will be interesting to see. But it will be good, and hopefully if people are putting forward the 3-year projections, it gives us a real opportunity to see where anything slips, people understanding that they'll maybe get it in another year or two, and allow other projects to come forward in monitoring rounds, rather than just grasping at a little bit for every department. I should have asked. Actually, I think one of the other questions we need to understand is, and it goes back to, I guess, our meeting with the Hilary Ben, is this thing about the prioritisation and how it marries with the programme for government, and are they prioritising? Are they prioritising on the basis of programme for government priorities, and how does that work out? And I think I would say the centre, i.e. First Deputy, First Minister and the Finance Minister, should be saying on a 5-year basis or a multi-year basis, we are prioritising this strand of investment because it matches results in the programme for government, notwithstanding critiques people have, including me with my other hat at the PFG, and therefore other things are being deprioritised to avoid
simply departments bombarding the centre with bids in a kind of unstrategic way. So how it marries in with PFG priorities and how that is being connected is important. Deirdre, do you think you want to go?
Yeah, no, just again, I would welcome a multi-year budget because it says itself it's the first time in over 10 years. And I think to start to give that bit of stability, notwithstanding there's still pressures. But I would be keen then when we're back after the recess in terms of the 5-year plans.
Yeah.
Because as you say, how these start to change the approach of departments,
Yes.
And particularly where there's opportunities in terms of transformation going forward and even ring fencing potential budgets. Yeah. Where you're encouraging departments to work more proactively together in terms of those budgets, and the whole issue around how they're going to measure outcomes in a better way using, you know, the budgetary process in order to do that. So it'd be keen, as well as the budget itself and going through that, how all these things align then in terms of transformation and the departmental plans as well.
That is absolutely correct, and I think it's definitely right that this can't be seen simply as a bilateral process of, obviously this is the challenge generally, like people trying to get, you know, obviously people want to get the maximum settlement for their department, but there should be a leadership from the centre in terms of setting priorities and other entities willing to acknowledge that actually this can't, you know, it's not just about our work stream, it's about, okay, people are happy enough with that? Thank you. Okay, the next agenda item is post-19 SEN support special educational needs. That's at page 50 of the table pack. Members will recall an item of correspondence which were considered at last week's meeting in relation to post-19 SEN support. The committee agreed to forward these to the Economy Committee, as DFE and DOH are leading on this issue. The Economy Committee has now written to the correspondents, who have been advised to direct any further correspondence to that committee, which will liaise with other committees as appropriate. That's the note. Agenda item 6 is SR 25-104, the Whole Government Accounts Designation of Bodies Order 2025. At page 177 of the meeting pack, there's a cover note and relevant correspondence. The department's formally laid a statutory rule which will enable them to request information from those departments and bodies designated in the order and pass on the information to the Treasury for use in the preparation of whole government accounts. This is an annual process. There have been no bodies added or removed since last year, and the rule has no direct financial implications. This is an ongoing UK-wide exercise which the Northern Ireland has been part of for the last 20 years. At the meeting of the 21st of May, we considered it and said we were content with it. Full details are page 179. The ESR has not raised any issues. Her report is at page 56. So I'm just going to ask if members are content with the statutory rule and put the question that the Committee for Finance has considered SR 25-104, the Whole Government Accounts Designation of Bodies Order, and there's no objection to the rule. People content?
Content.
The next agenda item is agenda item 7, which is SR 2025-109, the Public Service, Civil Servants and Others Pensions Amendment Regulations, Northern Ireland 2025. Page 191 of the meeting pack. There's a clerk's cover note and relevant correspondence from the department. That will increase. We've discussed this before, which could increase employee contribution bands in order to meet the required employee contribution scheme. Sorry, it will rather than could. In order to address the current shortfall, the department must make adjustments to the employee contribution rates to achieve the required 5.6%. Members have received briefing, both written and oral, on this matter in the past 5 months. At its meeting on the 11th of June, the officials briefed the committee on the detailed consultation responses and rationale for the way forward. Members agreed they were content with the proposed rule, but notwithstanding the questions that were asked. The rule is subject to negative resolution at the end of the statutory period. Full details of the draft rule, consultation and impacts can be found at page 193. The ESR is not yet formally reported in the rule, but at page 58 there's an email from her which says that the ESR will be brought to the special attention of the Assembly in relation to a breach of the 21-day rule. The ESR was made on the 13th of June 25, laid on the 13th of June 25 and comes into operation on the 1st of July. The Department has provided its explanation for the breach of the correspondence. The ESR is content with the explanation provided by the Department on this occasion. So I'm going to ask members if they're content with the statutory rule. The Committee for Finance has considered SR 2025-109, Public Service, Civil Servants and Others Pension Amendment Regulations, and there's no objection to the rule. Members content? Okay. Yes, okay, that's fine, yeah.
Hands aren't here.
They would have the officials in, but no hands, sorry. The timing was 2:40.
Okay. Okay, so what we will do is,
We'll go to it anyway, Clary.
Okay.
We'll just catch it.
we'll go to 10, okay, fine, we're going to go to 10. We're going to get an oral briefing from the department on procurement. And the brochure, an oral briefing on the service delivery brochure, members at page 277 of the meeting pack. There's a clerk's cover note starting page 280 of the meeting pack. There are a number of relevant documents, including a briefing paper from the department on the service delivery brochure with reference to CPD, a generic briefing on the service delivery brochure, and the DOF internal process. On the DOF internal process, internal peer review, and a copy of the public procurement policy statement. Finally, at page 65 of the meeting pack is correspondence from the Department of Finance regarding a statutory instrument to update the procurement thresholds. This SI will amend Schedule 1 of the 2023 Procurement Act in relation to the financial thresholds above which contracts are required to be advertised. The Finance Minister intends to grant permission to this revision as it is compulsory, amends the thresholds solely, and is a requirement to ensure that commitments are met under the agreement on government procurement. Members may wish to question officials further on this during the session. So this is the third and final session we have on service delivery brochure. So we welcome to the meeting again Sharon Smith, who's Deputy Secretary in the relevant area at the Department, Stuart Heaney, who's Director of Construction Division, Donna Williams, who's Director of Supplies and Services Division, and Donna Kavanagh, who is Director of Commercial Delivery Group. Sorry, I think I looked at Donna, the wrong Donna, when I was introducing you. My apologies for that. We're all ready for a break. Donna Kavanagh is Director of Commercial Delivery Group and Procurement Policy Division. It's nice to have you all here. Sharon, would you make some brief opening remarks?
Thank you, Chair, and members, for providing an opportunity for us to brief you on the CPD services outlined in the DOF Service Delivery Brochure, and also to highlight aspects of the Public Procurement Policy Statement agreed by the Executive on the 5th of June. Turning to the Service Delivery Brochure first, the services provided by CPD are procurement, construction-related services, project delivery and project assurance, and property management. There are 6 divisions in CPD. 4 of those are shared services, which operate on a cost recovery basis under memoranda of understanding with individual departments. You've already introduced the directors here today. Stuart is responsible for construction, procurement and project delivery. Donna Williams is responsible for supplies and services procurement across Northern Ireland Civil Service departments and their arm's length bodies. And Donna Kavanagh is responsible for project assurance, which includes the gateway review process. The 2 divisions that are not represented here today have responsibility for property maintenance services, property landlord services and building regulations. The committee may recall that I briefed it on the 20th of May alongside the Director and Deputy Director of Properties Division on the NICS Office's estate and the progress against KPIs it contains. So the written briefing provided in advance of today's meeting to the committee outlined the services provided by each division and the delivery against key performance indicators over the last 4 years. The written briefing also provided details of the key achievements delivered by each division to show the scale and activity across CPD. If you're content, Chair, I'll finish with the service brochure there and I'll move on to the policy statement.
Yes, please do.
From 2010 to 2024, there were at least 16 reports relating to public procurement, with over 220 recommendations on how procurement could be improved. The analysis of the recommendations identified 4 key principles: accessibility, efficiency and effectiveness, social value and transparency. The new Public Procurement Policy Statement takes account of the policy gaps identified in these legacy reports and also complements the new procurement legislation, the Procurement Act 2023, which came into effect on the 24th of February 2025. In developing the policy statement, officials...
So that was the UK?
Yeah, which Northern Ireland is a part of, as is Wales.
Yeah.
In developing the policy statement, officials worked closely with the Centres of Procurement Expertise, departments, and carried out significant engagement with key external stakeholders. The policy statement includes the key 4 principles which were identified through the analysis of the previous reports and lists 21 strategic objectives which aim to make public contracts open and proportionate to ensure local businesses can compete, demonstrate the procurement function is achieving best value for money and has appropriate capacity and capability, ensure social value is embedded within the culture of the procurement function and can demonstrate social, economic and environmental considerations are being maximised through the procurement spend, and ensure citizens know how public money is being spent. I hope this short briefing has given you a high-level overview of the services provided by CPD and a very high-level background of the Public Procurement Policy Statement. Thank you, Chair and Committee members, and we are happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Sharon. For that, I'm sure there will be many questions members will have. As always, members, please indicate should you wish to ask a question. I suppose, first, because it's topical, is understanding what advice you are giving those who you advise in other parts of the civil service around how procurement can be made consistent with and help deliver the targets in the 2022 Climate Change Act, and what work is going on, because obviously we've had a court judgment which has jeopardised a huge and vital piece of road infrastructure, and there's a lot of concern, first of all, about delivery of that, which is life-saving, but also the civil service generally being able to ensure that procurement is happening in a way that's consistent with all that. What advice are you giving to departments?
Each department has their own climate action plan, and through that they have to deliver the commitments in terms of decarbonisation and net zero. I'll maybe turn to Stuart in a minute on the construction advice given, okay. But it is in terms of collaborative procurement. For example, we use green specifications, and they're about energy efficiency, so the computer equipment that we buy are energy efficient. Even looking at the estate that we manage, it's in terms of how we can reduce carbon from that. In terms of procurement specifically, there is no policy note in terms of, how people should drive carbon out of their projects. That is through the climate action plans that each department have. But we are working very closely with the Department for Infrastructure. Obviously, it's a very detailed judgment, and legal advice is being sought about how to take that forward. In terms of the investment strategy now, which is in draft, but what we do have is 12 enabling actions, and the enabling action 12 is on decarbonisation.
Is it the investment strategy, did you say?
The draft investment strategy, yes, it hasn't come through the executive as yet, but we are working on 12 enabling actions in falling out of the root cause analysis report that the Strategic Investment Board carried out in 2023. And Action 12 is about decarbonisation and how we drive carbon out of projects, because we do understand carbon budgeting is very similar to financial budgeting. We do have a finite amount of carbon that will be budgeted for, but in terms of specific guidance, it is on a project by project basis. But Stuart, would you like to talk about the construction side?
Yeah, and on the building side, in lieu of a sector scheme to set out the policy position on the energy performance of public buildings, which the Department of Economy is developing, we have been advising departments and our customers generally on best practice or emerging best practice on energy conservation. Currently, that would take the form of a building energy research environmental assessment method, and we would be advising departments to aim for an outstanding level in terms of the energy conservation for the building. Other projects are going forward with a passive house approach, which again is designed to limit the energy in use in the building. So it's quite an extensive piece of work going into all projects now, right across the departments, in order to reduce the energy consumption that those buildings will use over the life, bearing in mind that buildings are designed for 50, 60 plus years. It's worthwhile investing in those things at this early stage.
But just to be clear about the post the A5 judgment, are one of you or all of you involved in sort of urgent discussions about changing how procurement is done to ensure that major projects are going to be able to go ahead and not fall foul of, first of all, be consistent with the Climate Change Act, and then be able to go ahead?
Obviously, there's a body of work being carried out in the Department for Infrastructure who are leading on the judgment and the outcome of the judgment, and there's legal advice being sought, Chair. So yeah. At the minute we have no clear direction in terms of the outworkings of that on other projects, but that is likely to come. As you say, there are urgent discussions happening. I'm a member of the Investment Strategy Committee, which is a subgroup of the NICS board. They have a meeting next week and this is on the agenda, but I think from an infrastructure point of view, as Stuart said, every building and every scheme is taken on its own merits in terms of the carbon that's likely to be derived, whether it's embodied carbon or whether it's, whether it's any other part.
And this is maybe a question from a position of ignorance, but isn't that a concern if you're only looking at it in terms of its individual carbon contribution? Then there's now been a judgment which suggests that something can be made consistent with overarching executive targets, that means that things really shouldn't be looked at in isolation. They should be consistent with the executive's overall targets. I guess what I'm asking is, what are you specifically doing to provide guidance to all procuring departments that their individual projects can fit within an overall, the overall targets?
There has to be a carbon methodology in terms of how the calculation works in order to find out what the total carbon will be. Each project looks at its carbon in its own merits. That's why it has to be done on a project by project basis. But you're right, there is a collective, which is where the investment strategy, investment plan, and where Enabling Action 12 will look at the decarbonation of the investment plan, which is obviously the majority of projects that are going to come through in terms of their scale. But there's business as usual, so there's a calculation in terms of carbon, in terms of business as usual, and the carbon budget minus business as usual minus what the project will bring, and that will lead to a formula, and all that needs to be looked at in the collective. But the judgment was only last week. There are officials working at this at pace. We understand the necessity to provide guidance to the others on projects.
Do you have any concern before the judgment that enough work hadn't been done so for example, the investment strategy which is unpublished, and that sounds like that's going to be critical to understanding how the executive's overall investment and capital spending profile is going to fit into targets, which, by the way, and my party strongly support. Others have said they don't, but we do. But we want to see broad plans to ensure that we can deliver them, and also critical infrastructure. Before last week, before the court judgment, did you have any concerns as one of the senior officials working in this area that there wasn't enough guidance for people in individual departments?
It's always been an enabling action for the last probably 12-18 months in terms of working through the decarbonisation objectives. The carbon action plans have been being developed, so it's always been in the consciousness that this needs to have to work its way through.
Just to understand what you mean by that, you say it's been an enabling action. Does that mean that there has been a concern that major projects need to be better, more consistent? And obviously, in an individual project, there'll be individual planning requirements, and there'll be consultation processes that are specific, and there'll be environmental and other impact assessments that are specific to each project that are out, and financial concerns that are out with the overarching climate targets. But specifically on climate targets, are you saying that does an enabling action mean there was a concern that there wasn't enough of a kind of joined up approach, or there wasn't a concern? Just trying to understand what enabling action means.
Well, the enabling actions were designed, and there are 12 of them, to look at any potential risk that projects may be delayed. So there is business case, planning process, procurement, project assurance, people, so we have workforce plans, the last one, and funding models for housing executive. All of those things are being investigated as well. The last one was on decarbonisation. In fact, enabling action 11 is on the DFA approach in terms of renewable energy. So it's always been a consideration, it's always been a factor in terms of all projects. DFI, in terms of this scheme, have been working really hard and have provided us with presentations about their approach to this and how they have calculated their carbon. So we're all on the same journey, but in terms of that specific case and the outworking of that, there hasn't been anything firm come out of that.
With great respect, clearly what they presented to you, and it might have been a lot of hard work went into it, it clearly didn't pass muster at the High Court. So is there going to be a refreshed piece of guidance? I know you're saying there are going to be meetings next week and there's urgent discussions happening. Is the upshot of that going to be updated guidance to anybody who is procuring a major capital project?
We are looking at the methodology for mandating, if that's the word, for bringing, it could be a Dear Accounting Officer letter, it could be a procurement policy note in terms of the outworkings of this. So what the carbon calculation would be, what the carbon methodology should be for all projects, yes.
Okay, I'm going to bring others now and we come back to that. Diane, for say.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. So I obviously sit on the Public Accounts Committee as well, so just to declare that, and we had reports out over the past year on both public sector procurement and the major capital projects. So I've covered some of that with you in those, but obviously across both of those aspects there's huge amounts of public sector money being spent. And just for the context of this committee, could you please detail how many staff there are working in procurement in the Northern Ireland Civil Service, and what the annual cost of that staff bill is for those working on procurement?
All I can give you is our own staff complement. I think it was in the briefing, 327 staff. We have 4 parts of our organisation are hard charging, and they deliver shared services through income generation. The staff bill for that is just under, I think, 16 million. And 2.5 million of that is in baseline costs, and those costs are generally for services that DOF deliver to itself. So that has to be covered by DOF, but generally it's 16 million, but not all of. I mentioned about the landlord services that we provide, some building regulations and a small policy team. Not all are hard charging, but that's generally the number of staff that we have. Most of them are qualified in terms of being an architect, an engineer, whether it's structural, mechanical and engineering, building surveyors, and on Donna Williams' side they would be procurement professionals qualified to a Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply. So we have a lot of qualified staff. We do have significant vacancies, and I think that's just general across the piece. So I don't think it would be
what level of vacancies would you have within?
At the minute, with 65 vacancies across a complement of just over 320 staff. That's the highest number of vacancies we've had in the last 12 months. The lowest number of vacancies that we've had are 40. Over the last 12 months, we've lost 39 staff, I think, and we've recruited 21. So we're constantly in a recruitment process. 16 of the staff that we've lost are due to retirement. We have the highest age profile in the Department of Finance. Over 20% of our staff are aged 60, and over 50% of our staff are aged over the age of 55. So we have a lot of experienced staff. Thankfully, a lot of them want to continue on beyond 60, but it's always a risk that we do carry. We're working very closely with our next HR colleagues and people in OD on retention strategies. The advice or policy recently about, how do you retain staff in critical posts, because we know one of the biggest factors is the pay differential between the public and private sector. There's also a pay differential between different parts of the public sector, and when you've got so many qualified staff, their skills are so transferable. So we do sometimes lose staff to other public sector bodies, which in the round is good, but particularly on Donna Williams' side, there is, I think, over 40% of Donna's staff now are trainee, which was really difficult to sustain. But we bring in placement students. Last year we brought in 8 placement students. So with people through their studies, we bring them in. We're looking at innovative ways of trying to keep those people. So when, like, private sector firms would say, you're in with us, you fitted in the organisation, you've done really well, we'll guarantee you a full-time job at the very end. We're working through how we could possibly make that happen, because a recruitment can take, up to 12 months, if not longer. So if you have somebody in that's done a year with you through their placement and you were keen and interested to keep them, we just need to look at more innovative ways of recruiting staff.
Thank you. I think it's important just to capture that picture, because this is, how we're spending public sector money, and it's good to be able to isolate that as well, as you say, in terms of the age profile, because the civil service is so big. You take these wide sweeping averages, but it's important to understand what you're dealing with in different business areas. I wanted to go on to speak a bit more about the increased participation of local small and medium-sized businesses, and I didn't see any targets that were specifically pointing towards that, and or the reputation of the public sector as someone for a small business to trade with, because very much the feedback that I would get from those local to me that I'd be dealing with are things like they're slow to deal with, you're significantly out of pocket, and then reclaiming the money, and then whenever you're doing that, it goes into e-invoicing matching system, which quite often doesn't match directly. It goes into a pile. It's really, really difficult to get speaking to anybody on account NI, and I've had to get involved with a number of local businesses in my area for people who were out of pocket some 8 months, just for all of those reasons. So the reputational piece, whereas it doesn't seem to be coming through in your customer satisfaction feedback here, is that it's actually it's just that reputation piece, and small businesses choosing not to engage. So I wonder why there aren't any targets like that, or does that where you feel that would sit? Because I can see it sort of coming through a little bit in this correspondence of today, but I think it's really, really important in Northern Ireland, where our small micro businesses are such a pivotal point.
We absolutely recognise that. That has come back in feedback previously, particularly with more than one of the 220 recommendations and legacy reports. So we are developing, and this came out as a recommendation from the recent PAC report in public procurement, to develop a stakeholder engagement and supplier communication strategy in consultation with Intertrade Ireland and Invest Northern Ireland and Federation of Small Businesses and Social Enterprise NI and CBI and all of the NICFAC and all the other key stakeholders. So we have completed that. We're Ministers due to launch that at an event with Intertrade Ireland on the 8th of July. And we work very closely, Donna Williams' team particularly, with Intertrade Ireland on the Go to Tender programme. So they're launching their ninth phase of this on the 8th of July down in Dundalk, and we're attending with them as one of their key partners. And it is really important that we do reach new suppliers. So in our strategy for supplier communications, we've set 100 new suppliers to be onboarded for next year, for the next financial year. And we're trying to do that just to get people to dip their toe in the water, because we do recognise that some suppliers have tendered in the past and maybe been put off because of the bureaucracy or perceived bureaucracy. And we also realise that there's some untapped businesses that are doing business elsewhere in the United Kingdom and other parts of the island and are not trading in Northern Ireland. We need to find out why that's the case. But we are particularly focused on that. We have a really good relationship with the Federation of Small Businesses. They reviewed the strategy, and we actually, in part of the stakeholder engagement strategy is our supplier communications is a day in the life of, because I do think there's some people in our environment who work very diligently in everything they do, but they don't see how that's received on the other side. So Donna and I have both put our hands up first to do a day in the life of a social enterprise. FSB are very keen that we broaden that out to micro businesses and small businesses to see how long it takes them to do a tender, how long it takes them. But one of the other things in the policy statement is the consideration of cash flow, because whilst we can't pay up front for things that aren't delivered, certainly structuring tenders so that cash flow is king. If businesses don't have it, they can't pay their contractors. So we have been working very closely again with the FSB. We did a conference with all the senior responsible owners and the Federation of Small Businesses to say how much impact this has on their members. Some of them having to take out loans to pay their staff because they're not getting paid on time. So it's getting that consciousness of the impact of the work that we do, because an invoice could sit in somebody's desk for 2 weeks and they maybe not see the consequences of that not actually being put through. So certainly in the civil service, our targets are actually quite good in terms of our prompt payment. The new Procurement Act that came in February 2025 actually changed the emphasis on prompt payment. It's not from when a valid invoice is received, it's from when an invoice is received. So that validity period has to be done within the 30 days. Previously the criticism was they got an invoice and they waited a long time to validate it. That's now gone. The validation has to be within the 30 days. And you can see with the papers that were sent, apologies that only came today, but that's the time that we've got it to you. They're looking to even strengthen that further in the further procurement reforms, which the Minister will be considering whether to be party of that or not. Stuart, do you want to mention some on the construction side?
Yeah, maybe just on the payment front, we have introduced a new computer system, construction information management system for all the construction contracts that we manage, and as part of that system the supplier will upload their invoice directly to the funding department, and the funding department is then required to confirm back to the supplier that they have been paid. And there's an easy route communication messaging system, if you like, between the contractor and the payer, so that should remove any doubt about when an invoice was placed or where it's at, and should provide immediate feedback on payment. Maybe just in terms then of SMEs, we operate for contracts under 4.4 million, under the threshold, if you like, a dynamic shortlisting system. And those contractors, there's about 250 contractors already pre-registered, and they can tender for small works without any pre-qualification. They are selected on a rota basis, and the shortlisting system is tiered in terms of value. So a small firm can begin with lower value projects, and as they gain experience they can then apply to move up the ranks to higher value work and then progress on to above threshold contracts. So there's quite a bit of work going on to support small companies in that area.
Thank you, and I'm glad to hear that, because often, you know, we get quoted the prompt payment figures where there's such a big story behind that and the challenges that are faced. And just a final one, in terms of projects, it's not just cost overrun, it's time delays quite often. So I just wonder, on page it's 28 of the service delivery brochure, you've got the delivery metrics there under the construction procurement, and it says 63% of integrated consultancy team or supply team PQQs evaluated within the timescale originally set at OBC stage. To me, 63% is quite a low target there to measure against. So just wonder what the thinking behind that was, or how some of these targets are set.
Well, that's not the target, that's what the outcome was last year.
Are there targets?
The targets is within 10% of the estimate as originally envisaged. So that is the outcome. So 63% of the projects were within 10%. And the reason why some of those are overshooting is that particularly those two KPIs are around the evaluation of both pre-QQs and tenders. That they will typically take about 30 days, so a 10% overshoot on that is about 3 days. So if the assessment takes typically 3 days more than was originally envisaged, then it will fall outside that KPI. So it's a fairly challenging KPI, but we recognise that that's important to drive timescales forward. Those assessments are not all done by our own staff. Construction projects, as you'll understand, are delivered by teams. So that KPI is dependent on the client, our own staff, and more often than not on private sector consultants who will be doing the assessment on certainly bigger schemes. So it's a combination of all those parties moving together in order to achieve those KPIs.
I wonder, in the brochure, going forward, if it could be considered whether putting a wee bit more of that detail in it, because we've got delivery metrics where it's saying that 63% of this and 74% of this aren't within the time scale.
Yeah, the brochure is being reworked currently for this year, and we can look at that.
Is and what it actually means would be quite helpful, because it does look like quite low percentages there if that's what the target is. But as you've explained, it's a bit different to that. But thank you very much for that, and thank you.
Okay, Gemma.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you all for coming in. You mentioned in your opening statement about key achievements. Can you elaborate further on that?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah. I suppose, firstly, to say it's given us an opportunity. The annual procurement report launched today, and it's on the website, and it does show the amount of activity across the centres of procurement expertise. Just looking at some stats from 2021 to 22, there was 5,237 contracts awarded at a value of just under 3.5 billion. This year there were over 6,500 contracts awarded at more than 5 billion. So you can see, even with the amount of resources and resource constraints, there's still a significant amount of procurement activity. And I know sometimes the only thing that hits the headlines are the projects that don't get moving, but there's a significant amount of projects that do get moving. In terms of supplies and services division, 362 contracts were awarded at a value of just under £1 billion, 965 million, which is significant on the supplies and services side. And in terms of the COPE analysis, that's the largest amount of spend on all COPEs. It's about 33% of all COPE spend. So a significant amount of work done there. On the construction side, procurement, design and cost advice was given to over 70 schools at a value of 590 million, and advice on delivery, procurement and management of grant and capital funded programmes and projects at various stages, totaling just £1 billion. And then design, procured and contract managed the delivery of 450 minor civil engineering, geotechnical and building projects valued at over 15 million. On Donnachavan's side, the commercial delivery group delivered 24 gateway reviews, 6 programme project health checks and 4 assurance of action plans. There were 16 SRO masterclasses held, 5 internal peer review training sessions held, and I think there were 7 SRO events held in the last 2 years as well. On the property maintenance side, there's quite a number of orders that goes through. There's £80 million of a framework was awarded over 4 years. There's 656 projects delivered and supported by the stores team at just under 1.5 million. And there was 73,000 planned preventative maintenance and remedial orders raised with an estimated value of over 6.9 million. That's just an example of the work that we do. It is wide and it's ranging, but you can see the amount of professional and technical resource that's required to deliver all that.
Yeah, no, that's great, Sharon. Thank you for that detail. And in terms of social value, can you outline some of the things the department has achieved in respect of this?
Well, social value is, thank you very much, social value is delivered through all centres of procurement expertise, and it's monitored by a strategic investment board. So just indeed, we gathered figures for the annual procurement report, but the total social value delivered to date, and that's just not in the Department of Finance, it's through all the centres of procurement expertise, it's 6,238 people who were long-term unemployed or disadvantaged in the labour market have gained employment. 220 social enterprises have been part of the supply chain, and that is a big achievement for us, because previously, and talking to some of the larger social enterprises, they used to have to bang the door of private sector organisations even to get a meeting. Now their door is the people are queuing outside the door to try and get them to come and partner with them because of social value. Just under 9,000 hours of volunteering delivered by the VCSE sector delivered with them. Nearly 20,000 hours of skills development activities, just over 4,000 weeks of work experience delivered, and over 13,500 hours of health and wellbeing initiatives. There have been over 6,000 hours of environmental initiatives, over 2,500 hours of digital inclusion, and nearly 4,000 environmental action plans delivered. So again, a key amount of activity, and Strategic Investment Board Social Value Unit do a really good job at gathering this information, collating it, and also supporting SMEs, micro businesses and SEs throughout the supply chain to help deliver social value.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Sharon, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Okay, happy enough, Jim. Jerry Carroll.
Thanks very much. A couple of questions from me. I was at a picket line last week in North Belfast for NI water workers, sort of striking for pay. And there were some of them were talking about the issue of sort of contracted work and maintenance work through NI Water, and it sounds to be quite concerning in terms of how it operates. And I appreciate this can't be over every sort of government body and department and how they operate. But basically, what they were saying is the cost of outsourced work is astronomical, and they're concerned about some of them, how basically initial first fee being charged is sort of a small fee, and then it kind of goes up if there's extra works to be done on pipes, sewage systems, and so on and so forth. So I'm not an expert in how NI water or the sewage system works, but I'm kind of wondering if there's any works that you're looking at in terms of to see whether this is a question of possible overspend or maybe unfair spending of public money, because all the conversation about NI water seems to go down the direction of yes, the water charges, but from what I was from what I was told last week, there seems to be some concern about sort of how much is spent on maintenance works, and kind of how there can be a process for investigating any overspend, mismanagement, or however you want to frame it. So I'm not sure if that's on the radar, but is there anywhere where I can direct people to report that if you're aware?
It wouldn't be on our radar.
Yeah.
What we do in terms of Department of Finance with Donna and shared operational centres of procurement expertise, they are very much focused and very much responsible for the work that they do. There is an overarching policy monitoring role for Department of Finance, where we support the Minister in terms of the delivery of public procurement policy. So it would only be where it was breaching public procurement policy that would potentially come to our attention. But it hasn't been raised with us before, but anything we can do to help or direct to the right people in
I appreciate that. I've submitted some assembly questions on that, so we'll see what we get back, but it could be a big issue. It might not be, but we'll have to ask the question. Just the other points from me on that separate issue, Sharon. In terms of vacancies, you mentioned the deputy chair. Do you have a figure how long on average it takes to fill a post? Because we were doing a bit of work a few weeks ago at some of the AO civil service jobs, and it was the guts of a year, 9 months, maybe 10 months for a lot of some of those posts, if not all of them, to be filled. So, which is crazy. But do you have an average time how long it takes for a post to be filled?
It can vary because there's different methods to fill. You can fill from like a departmental transfer notice. The unfortunate thing for us is our professional technical, we know there's no supply in the wider civil service. Generally it can take between 12 and 18 months to not only to do the recruitment, but for the staff, if they're external, to give their notice, to do the pre-employment checks and then come in. We know we're working closely with our colleagues because we know in terms of the professional technical staff that's too long. People are not waiting for jobs. They are, they're even we've found issues with placement students where they don't get out in time and get the offers out. They're gone to other private sector organisations. So I know this is very much close to my PermSec's work, and we are all, particularly with the people strategy, the 5-year people strategy, we're all working at very innovative ways to do this differently, because you've heard the number of people leaving is far exceeds the number of people we're bringing in, and that's from a basis of vacancies. So we're going to be constantly in the recruitment business, so we have to find a way to do that and to do it at pace. But I know Catherine Shannon was up, I think last week or the week before, on the next HR side, that there are plans in place to help move it, and we're working very closely with our next HR colleagues to make sure that a lot of us are actually heads of profession as well, so we wear many hats, but it's too long, Jerry, and we've seen that in terms of.
I appreciate the detailed answer. It just seems a really long time, and I would encourage.
We're doing everything we can.
Yeah. Just final for me is, obviously, BAM or BAM company around the Children's Hospital has been in the news a lot quite recently. An example of that company, and I'm not asking you to speak specifically on any particular organisation, but if a company like that was in the news for their practice in terms of how they're completing or not completing public works, would there ever be a situation where yourselves as procurement leads would say that a department, X organisation is not reputable or is not worth sort of go down the road of giving large sums of public money to? So is there a general circumstance where that would happen? And if so, do you have any recent examples in terms of how often that would happen?
Well, the Procurement Act that came in February 2025 has a new process called a debarment list, and that's exactly what that's for. There's that, and there's also the contractors who, through their poor performance, there's an exclusion there as well. But the debarment list, so that was the 24th of February. On the 25th of February, the UK government announced that 7 suppliers were being investigated for debarment, and those 7 suppliers were linked to the Grenfell disaster and further cladding issues. So it is possible, but what would happen is the people that are having problems with that specific supplier would then come to CPD to say, we believe this organisation or supplier should be investigated. We then work closely with Cabinet Office in terms of the investigation. And if it reaches the bar, and the bar is set quite high, then they could be on a debarment list, which means that there has to be a due diligence taken to that before any contracts are awarded. There's obviously mechanisms for self-cleansing, and it's because what we don't want to do is put businesses out of businesses, because we know most of those particularly large businesses have a lot of employees. So you do have to tread through a process to make sure that if there are issues, can they be remedied? If they're remedied, are they sustainable, and is it ever going to happen again? Or
And a quick one, sorry, Chair, on the debarment list in England or Britain, does that automatically mean they're debarred here, or how does that work?
The debarment list is on a UK-wide basis.
Okay,
so well, apart from Scotland, because they're not privy to the regulations. So we look at the debarment list before we're doing our contracts or even awarding direct award contracts. There's no one on the debarment list yet because it only came in the 24th of February, but there were very soon after that came in 7 investigations were initiated.
Thanks.
Okay. No other members have indicated their such. Just a couple of final ones from me. Just one is on the dilapidation bill, which the Environment Minister introduced the other day. Obviously, this is, I would imagine, pertinent to yourself. He states is in your world, but also some of the other services that are covered in the brochure. What are the consequences of the dilapidation bill for the Department of Finance and the wider civil service as both as an owner of properties, but also you're selling sort of property management services effectively to the rest of the state?
Well, I just caught the end of the debate in the
Yeah.
chamber, I think it was yesterday or the day before,
Yeah.
and did listen to it with interest because there's maintenance responsibilities, and quite rightly so, to make sure that properties are kept to a high standard. We do have a number of listed properties in our own estate, as you'll probably be aware. We have to be very cognizant of that. So there will be liabilities, and those liabilities will be financial liabilities to make sure that the maintenance is kept up. But as a diligent landlord, we should be investing in our buildings, and particularly as a public sector, we should be leading by good example. So really, I haven't actually read the details of the bill. I did watch the debate, and we will be looking at it with interest.
Okay, just on warrant. So, are there any, from your perspective, civil service estate properties that are derelict at the minute?
Not derelict, but we do have a number of vacant. So none of them are into dereliction. They're all very much recently vacated by operating departments, and we are now moving very quickly and at pace to dispose, because obviously Land and Property Services have their public sector surplus asset policy, and that requires us as, again, diligent owners of assets to move those where they are declared surplus, to move them on. The only complicating factor in the NICS estate is in the Stormont estate itself. There's primary legislation that protects all the properties in the Stormont estate. We can't lease them, we can't sell them on. So, we have to make sure that we have a plan for those, particularly ones that have become vacant in our area, in the estate.
Yeah. Just on that, so a property, in terms of rating, a property is basically you can be exempt from rates if the property's derelict, or if it is incapable of being let and therefore serving a kind of, being rented out for any purpose. Dundonald House, as of right now, is Dundonald House, you may not be aware, but do you know, are they paying rates in Dundonald House?
We are paying, I think we're down to 50% rates because it's been vacated. We can move to 100% no rates because it's a listed building. Okay. But that is only when every stick of furniture is out of that building, and we should be there by the end of August. So we should be down to 0 rates in Dundonald House at that stage.
Oh, okay. So, but your view is not that, so Dundonald House is not derelict, and is the department's view that it could be let?
Can't let it because it's in the Stormont estate, unless we change the 1933 Stormont Act, which protects all of the property in the Stormont estate.
You can't. Okay. So the reason from your perspective, from Dundonald House being empty, is not because it is it's not because it's derelict, it's because it's in the Stormont estate.
Well, the estate strategy.
It doesn't feel particularly kind of healthy, or like you could, feels a bit like there's lots of, it's not quite scaffolding, but it's covered off by wire fence.
Yeah, well, there's an exclusion zone, and that's because of health and safety, because of the structural issues that happened June 2023, where some of the facade around the cornicing decided to fall, and we have been vacating furniture, files, everything's out except for some elements of furniture, everything else is out. That the plan there, obviously, you might be aware, was to use this as part of the Northern Ireland Civil Service Sports Association major development, but it didn't come to fruition. It sort of fell down at planning stage. The plans were in our estate strategy because of the cost that would bring Dundonald House back into use. That we would mothball it and then look at options. So we are Stuart's team's looking at a cost consultants looking at options and costs to bring that back into use. Because it is a very big building, it is on the Stormont estate, it is not pretty to look at in terms of all the fencing that goes around it. There are a lot of people who want it to be protected. There are others who think it shouldn't be, but it's a listed building, and everything's in it listed, including the pillars that surround it. So the interior as well. So there are a lot of decisions to be made. It's going to take a huge amount of money to bring that back into use, and then it becomes a decision of whether we do that or we do hospitals, schools, maintenance, whatever else. So all of this will become an interesting debate in times to come.
Okay, one final question for me is on a bill, so something which was a bill but didn't get passed. It's the Economic Activity of Public Bodies Overseas Matters Bill that was to restrict then, at the time, local authorities and I presume Stormont or other devolved administrations from potentially making procurement decisions based on, for reasons, for example, the example often quoted is Israel, but it wouldn't simply be Israel, it would be other entities too. Is there any, and has the Minister asked for any specific guidance on procurement in relation to excluding particular jurisdictions or minimising procurement from particular jurisdictions, or is that something that's out with the Department's responsibility?
It's back to the debarment list. There are mechanisms within the Procurement Act to debar suppliers, for a range of reasons. The correspondence.
Those have to be done at a UK level. It couldn't be done locally.
UK level.
And nothing locally. They couldn't make any decisions that would violate UK agreements or anything like that.
Well, we're based on the World Trade Organization Government Procurement Agreement, which requires us to align, which is why the decision was taken to bring our jurisdiction into the Procurement Act, because to sit outside that would mean we'd have to copy all the trade elements. So the reason we're in the Procurement Act is to make sure we align. We didn't go into the Procurement Act for all of the provisions, so we have policy levers, we have competency here, as you know, devolved competency for procurement, and our executive can make procurement policy decisions. We would have to look very closely. But the policy decisions can't impinge in terms of the WTO trading agreements. So we'd have to look at that very carefully, but we certainly would provide advice if we were asked for that.
The executive could follow a different policy, but it would have to. But it could be what judicially reviewed if it was deemed to violate UK agreements or the WTO.
Well, certainly strong legal advice would have to be taken before we went in any particular direction.
Has any advice been sought in that regard?
Not specifically on that.
Okay,
what I will say is the proposed further reforms for procurement, which I know you've received very late in the day, that were launched on the 26th by the Cabinet Office, talk about national security, so talk about almost protecting certain areas of industry here. Yeah,
it's a slightly different question, but I see the point you're making.
But there's always further reforms that may come down the line.
Yeah, I think sadly, I'm not sure. Anyway, there's lots I could say that I won't. But on that note, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
We're going to jump around a bit.
Yes.
So, with members' agreement, we're just going to move around the agenda slightly. So if we can go to forward work programme and seek agreement on that. So that is on your page 25.
Fine. Okay. Great. Okay.
We'll start looking at correspondence after that.
Yeah. Great. So draft work programme. Okay. So members. Draft forward work programme is at page 712 of the meeting pack. Members, the month of September will be populated and revisited in time for consideration at the first meeting after recess. But obviously, as we've discussed today, we have lots on our agenda for the autumn. Clerk, want to say a few words?
Chair, we've now confirmed literally live a couple of raise briefings, so we'll get those on the 10th and 17th. We're going to ask members if they will agree to starting at 1 p.m. on both the 10th and 17th of September, if members are content with that, because we know we're going to have hefty agendas. I'm
thrilled. You'll have had the whole summer to look forward to.
No, so I'm going to take that as a yes.
Well, it's just the 10th is my birthday, so if you want to...
we can do special
cakes, yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
I definitely offer for that. Yeah, an excuse to have
cakes. Do that.
Have an overnight then?
You see, all you just, if you provoke me, I'll maybe look at that. Okay, that's really helpful, members.
Okay.
There's nothing really else to pin down on that. I just wanted to get agreement on that. And Chair, then if if we get agreement, Chair, then to schedule getting the department to send us back details around a schedule of secondary legislation and any items of business that they want to schedule for the latter part of 2025.
Yes, that's. But I say with the specific emphasis on we have enough of our own business, and I'm not saying the department do this, but if they have people who want to come and show us their brochures or their or kind of but I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but I think we've got our banking review, we've got fiscal framework, we've got the civil service work, we've got the multi-year spending. I think we've got lots and two bills, so I think the emphasis should be on doing those things rather than. But I think the way we should phrase it is if the department has urgent, pressing new policy questions that they, and obviously the routine stuff that we should be telling us about, we will take evidence on. But routine sort of BAU, I think we need to be quite firm about saying we're grand, we can get it in writing.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I wonder, can we communicate to the department that, given that the returns on the multi-year budget are due on the 4th of September, that we would like some sort of synopsis for our first meeting back after the summer as to where they all received, just at a high level, they've got
really
them,
good
and
idea.
where are they?
Particularly given, like, basically, I think a briefing paper of some kind, including the questions we asked earlier on. I think if that's in order. Okay, members happy enough? Okay, so that is the forward work programme. We're now going to go back and do correspondence.
Then we'll start with correspondence, page 22.
Yeah, we're going to do correspondence on page 22. Okay, so members, this is item 13.1. So 13 is correspondence. Page 466 of the meeting pack. There is correspondence from the Committee for Communities regarding the Invest to Save initiative. The Communities Committee has written to the Finance Minister regarding engagement with the Treasury on the Invest to Save initiative. The committee has been copied in on this, and we will expect to be copied into a response. So that's just a note. From the Public Accounts Committee at 13.2, there is update from page 468. The PAC has released its primacy on the NIAO report, Health and Social Care Imaging Services in Northern Ireland, but I expect that's for the Health Committee, not for us. The next agenda item is Construction Employers Federation response to consultation. That's at page 470. CEF has issued a press release and published its response to the Department of Infrastructure's consultation, developer contributions for wastewater. They have had some criticisms of the proposals, but that is for the Infrastructure Committee. So that's to note. 13.4, joint position paper, NI Chamber, Construction Employers Federation and NI Federation of Housing Associations. That's at page 470. Joint position paper from the NI Chamber, Construction Employers Federation and NI Federation of Housing Associations is on wastewater infrastructure, has been submitted to the Minister for Infrastructure. That's to note. 13.5, NISRA 24-25. Oh, sorry, you want to come in on that? Yes, Deputy Chair. On the NISRA, okay. 24-25 NISRA annual report and accounts at page 521. NISRA has formally laid its annual report and accounts for 2024-25 in the Assembly. Deputy Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Another thing for once we return after the summer break, I wonder, can the committee ask that we get a summary of, once Friday has passed, how many 24-25 accounts have been laid in the Assembly and met the summer recess deadline. It's really good to see the NISRA ones in particular under the DOF guys and NIPSO in so promptly, but I think it would be good to have a feel for how many met summer recess in terms of financial reporting.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I think that makes sense. Okay, well, that's for that. And you can explain to us all what they mean. They are detailed accounts, and okay, that's of course we're all okay. Great. So the next one is also it's another acronym, the NIPSO annual report and accounts. That's at page 617. The NIPSO, which is the Northern Ireland Public Services Ombudsman, has formally laid its annual report and accounts for 24-25 in the Assembly. Though this has been sent to the committee by a business office, it may be more appropriate to forward this to the Audit Committee, which primarily scrutinises and agrees the NIPSO budget. CNAG has made no comment, on these accounts. Anybody wants to come in on those? No, okay. Then next agenda item is a press release from the Equality Commission for Northern Ireland. Members, is page 702 of the meeting pack. This relates to the press release which was issued by the Equality Commission, highlighting the publication of its views on the legal position in Northern Ireland following a review of the Supreme Court judgment in For Women Scotland Limited versus Scottish Ministers. So members, this is to note at this stage, and somebody wishes to come in, Deputy Chair.
Yeah, apologies on the previous item, I didn't just declare an interest. I'm also sitting as a member of the Audit Committee.
Okay, fair enough. The 13.8 is the ESR report, which is the Examiner Statutory Rules. Members, that is page 703 of the meeting pack. The Examiner of Statutory Rules has published her 42nd report. There are no rules with relevance to us. Now, the tabled pack at page 88 is the Department of Finance's annual report and accounts. The Department has laid its annual report and accounts for 24-25 in the Business Office. The CNAG has made no comment on the accounts. So fair enough. Well done. That's good. They've escaped the commentary. Caesar's wife is above reproach, as they say. Okay. 13.20 correspondence over some recess. This is just a la the FOI stuff. If this is just to say that members, items of correspondence that are received over the summer will be considered when we come back to the first meeting, which is why the clerk has asked for the additional hour, because we do, if anyone remembers when we came back, we had about 3 years of correspondence to go through then, so you do kind of need to plough through it. It's probably worth saying that anything that is urgent, we will obviously will be dispatched to people, and people should be ready to deal with it. Obviously, we don't cease to be members of the Finance Committee, and I will be keeping a watching brief on it as chair. Go ahead, Jerry Carroll.
Just to make it a bit easier, maybe September, is there a way of kind of going through it, that kind of ask members to start if they want to raise anything or object, or
I think that's a sensible. I think
there's no need to go through everything in detail, and it does take a lot.
I think probably that's a sensible point. I think what we might do is think about listing the individual bits of correspondence just for the record, so that entities that have sent us things are aware that we have acknowledged and noted the correspondence and it has been engaged with. And then, by exception, if any member who wants to raise or comment on, they can talk about whatever they want. I think that's a good idea. Okay. Yeah, and that will save my vocal cords as well.
If we go back
to
Article 11.
Yeah, we'll go back to Article 11, which is our oral evidence. So members, yes, okay, bang on time. We are now, members, going to get an oral evidence briefing on the deaths, stillbirths and baby loss bill. We're getting oral evidence from the National Association of Funeral Directors. At page 410 of the meeting pack, there's a clerk's cover note. This is obviously on the death, stillbirths and baby loss bill by Gemma. At page, and this is at 410, there's a clerk's cover note. At page 412, there's a written briefing from the National Association, which was also provided at last week's meeting. Members have already agreed to add this to the committee bill, the committee report in the bill, excuse me. Also provided for this agenda item are the following papers: a response from the Department of Finance to questions raised during the GRO's oral briefing the 7th of May, the response from Lisburn and Castlereagh Council, the Hansard transcript from the committee deliberations on the bill at the meeting on the 18th of June, and the response from Armagh, Banbridge and Craigavon Borough Council, which is being circulated in hard copy because it came in relatively late. So members, if everyone's agreed, we'll put these on the evidence base for the committee's report in the bill. Everyone's agreed? Yeah? Yeah, okay. So at page 423 of the meeting pack is a notice of amendments for consideration stage of the bill. Members should note that these are amendments which have not been accepted by the Speaker. They are provided for noting purposes only. So, having said all that, we now have, I'm very pleased to say, Stephen Larkin, who is President of the Northern Ireland Federation, which is part of the National Federation, and Nick Britton, who's Communications Lead for the Federation for representing Northern Ireland and Scotland. So thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Nick, for your time. We've been really keen to get, because you are genuinely a key stakeholder in this process, and I think it's worth saying that I'm not saying anything, I think, too previous, but there's widespread agreement that we want to get the provisions that came in COVID onto the statute book in a more permanent way, both as service users and service service delivery partners. The funeral directors want that, I think, because it's smoother, but also you are critical to managing people at a time of vulnerability and grief, and so we're really keen to get your views on the record. Thanks very much for joining us. So Stephen, I don't know if you want to say a few words to open us up, or indeed Nick, but if you had a few points you wanted to make in advance.
Just as you say, Chair, that the provisions have been in place since COVID. We have done a lot of work as the National Association of Funeral Directors with the various health trusts within Northern Ireland to try and make the process as seamless as possible for families. And by and large, it is working very, very well. The trusts are very supportive of it, in so much that because it's all done electronically and remotely, they don't have family members coming back onto the ward at a time of bereavement and sitting about waiting on a medical certificate of cause of death being completed. They have the confidence that that's going to be emailed directly to the GRO, and the next contact they would have then would be via telephone from their local registry office to register the death. From the local registry office's point of view, it's saving them an awful lot of time, because previously they would have had to make appointments for bereaved families to come in. So you can imagine if a family say they'll come in at 10 o'clock and maybe somebody calls to the door and they get delayed or whatever else, they're not arriving in to 10:15 maybe. The registrar then has lost 15 minutes out of their working day as such, whereas now they're getting the medical certificate emailed to them directly, a phone call, and it's registered. They're finding it so much more efficient, and it's a more efficient time for them, yeah.
suppose it would just be helpful for the record, Stephen, is just to maybe for us to set out for the record what was the process that you and other funeral directors had to follow, and I suppose the process then that both bereaved families and hospitals had to follow at the point of death.
Well, prior to COVID, what would have happened would have been the person passed away. Say if they passed away during the night in a hospital setting, for example, there's obviously no doctors on duty at that time of the night that would be able to issue the medical certificate of cause of death. Yeah. Families then went home and were told to come back to the ward then the following morning to collect the medical certificate. Quite often they're arriving back up to the ward and maybe the doctor had been dealing with an emergency, hadn't got the medical certificate wrote, so they were then sitting on the ward, which is upsetting whenever they've left during the night with their loved ones passed away, having to sit and wait on the medical certificate being issued and then take that physical copy back then to their relative town, wherever they lived, and then made an appointment then with the local registry office, have to go in with a physical copy. The registrar then went through all the necessary arrangements and produced the medical certificate cause of death.
It was right to say that if in that instance where someone's bereaved in that way, they literally have to basically wait until there's a doctor available to sign. Previously, until the doctor to physically sign this form, and obviously they themselves could be bereaved. Obviously, in some instances, it's always traumatic and upsetting, but it'll be. That could be in the case if it was a very young person who had passed away. They're obliged to sit there and wait until physical.
Until they're handed a physical hard copy. Whereas now, and we have put an awful lot of work in with the various health trusts and doctors' surgeries, to ask them to ensure that whenever the person passes away, that their family are informed of the process, and that they'll be sent electronically, and the families have no need to go back to the place where the deceased has died. They have no need to collect a physical copy of the medical certificate and then having to make an appointment. It's all done remotely, and families can go home and spend time with their families and await a phone call, which is far better at a time of death rather than running about from pillar to post to try to get a death registered.
I suppose in a particular instance, so for example, if it's the setting could be for a care home and it might be someone who's very elderly, that will be upsetting, but it's a different proposition to a young person, for example, who passes away in a hospital. That's then a very difficult thing for a next of kin or a family member to go back the next morning to if something has happened very suddenly.
Not all deaths are nice and peaceful and sedate. Some are very traumatic for people. And that's as you say, Chair. It's hard for them then to go back to that, particularly so soon after it happening. And having to sit there and maybe look at an empty bed or where their loved one was just a few hours ago. So that takes all that away from them, and the fact that they can go and know in their heart of hearts, well, everything's going to go on behind the scenes and it'll be done for me.
Okay. Nick, thank you for joining us. Nick Britton, who is from the National Association too, and joining us remotely. Nick, could you just say in other parts of the UK, this change was this change also made via COVID, or had it been a reform that had happened earlier? I don't know if you're able to hear it. Yeah, everything okay? You're on classic. You're on mute, or we need to turn your mic on, Nick. We're just establishing which. Yes, that's you now. Yeah.
I didn't know I was. Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, members of the committee. Thank you very much indeed for your time this afternoon. Broadly, this was brought in by the UK government and indeed the devolved nations during COVID. In England, we have the births and death registration in brackets, electronic communications and electronic storage, close brackets, order of 2021. And that allows for digital transmission of and storage of documents. In Scotland, there's a kind of wider breadth of legislation that covers all of this kind of thing. There is the electronic transfer, there is the certification of death, in brackets, Scotland, close brackets, 2011, which allowed doctors to send the MCCD, so the medical certificate of cause of death, electronically to the registrar. And then during COVID, we had the Coronavirus Act, Scotland, in brackets number 2, close brackets, that's 2020, and that's allowed for electronic transfer and service of documents related to death registration. And then latterly, was the Coronavirus in brackets Recovery and Reform close brackets open brackets Scotland close brackets Act of 2022, and that allowed for remote death registration. So, amongst all of that legislation, allowed for a seamless process whereby everything's pretty much done remotely, from the transfer of documents right through to appointments for people to register the death. So, to that end, I think what the Northern Ireland Assembly is looking to do here is really, really welcome. It's a brilliant move for bereaved people. It saves them a lot of heartache, a lot of time, a lot of waiting around, a lot of stress and strain. And Stephen's touched upon some of that a little bit earlier on. But it also brings them into line into what else is happening in the UK.
Okay, so that would be catching up, I suppose, in that regard. Although the provision's already there, but just under the premises of the under the provisions of the Coronavirus Act. I'm just going to bring in other colleagues now. Diane Forsyth first, who's the Deputy Chair.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you both for coming and helping us along the way with this evidence. I just wonder, in terms of just building on the last question, learning from elsewhere in the UK and your experiences as you've moved across to this method. Obviously, it's more efficient and it takes away a lot of the difficulties at a very difficult time, as you have said. But has there been any instances where you've identified risks or mistakes or fraud or any learning across the board that we should be taking account of? Because this is our first time bringing this in legislation. So if there have been any issues that have come up, I just wonder if there's any learning or anything that you want to highlight that we should be building in.
I suppose from our point of view in Northern Ireland, we do things very quickly, Diane, in comparison to England. Scotland is slightly would be of a similar nature to us in the time frame that they're working towards. There's been no issues. I was talking to colleagues in Scotland. As Nick said, the actual transfer of the MCCD has been able to be done from 2011, but it's only since 2020 that they've actually been able to register the death then online as well and remotely, and they have found no issues or it hasn't flagged up any issues as regards paperwork. No,
that's great. Thank you.
If I may, sorry, Diane, if I may come in on that, just very, very briefly, if I may. I think Stephen is right. We haven't, and I've worked very, very closely with the Scottish system for a number of years, and sort of went through a similar exercise in working groups and doing parliamentary stuff with them. There's one slight, I guess, concern raised, but not one that has actually ever come to fruition. In as much as if everything is done electronically, if the family ends up disagreeing with a medical cause of death or what's on the death certificate, sometimes that they feel that could be a little late in the day. In other words, in previous systems, in what I would refer to the olden days, if you like, they would get a sight of the death certificate and the cause of death very, very early, and were able to flag any issues that they felt were prevalent to it. That process sometimes doesn't happen until a little bit later on now. But I've never heard of any cases where that's caused an issue or caused a problem. But it is something that's perhaps just worthy of consideration. On the whole, everybody wins out of this. Everybody wins. The families win, the funeral directors win. The rest of Great Britain. So if you look at England particularly, but also increasingly in Scotland and to a lesser extent in Wales, one of the key issues facing funeral directors and bereaved people at the moment is the time between death and funeral and delays to the process. Implementing a system like this and implementing it permanently helps keep any delays to an absolute minimum. And I think that's a really, really important part of why the bill should be passed, introducing or making these measures permanent. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think, it is really important, we talk about the sensitivities around this, this entire process, and we don't want to cause anybody any additional distress where we can help that. But just as you have raised there, Nick, where a family have concerns around what the actual cause of death is, and if this has gone through in this particular way, it may cause concerns and additional stress where they don't know, or they don't agree with that. What would you suggest in terms of us on this draft, and should there be a time period built in? What do you think would help us to make sure that in drafting this, that we allow something to be inbuilt enough that if a family was to question the cause of death, they have a compassionate space in which we can bring that forward?
Well, I think they already have a compassionate space. I don't think anything specific needs to be introduced that doesn't exist already. It was just, I just wanted to raise with you, seeing as you'd asked the question, that was something that was raised at the outset in Scotland, but hasn't really borne fruition in reality, or not certainly that we're aware of. As long as there is, and I believe there is in Northern Ireland, obviously, time and process already existing for anybody to raise concerns, should they have them, then nothing needs to change.
I think from our point of view.
Bear in mind, apologies, it's worth having that. Of course, the electronic transfer of documentation has been going ahead in Northern Ireland since it was introduced during the pandemic, and I'm certainly not aware. And Stephen, when you and I were talking about this last week, I don't think you flagged up anything aware of where there might be a chink in the armour regarding this.
No, I was just going to say, anybody who, whenever they physically got a copy of the MCCD, unless you have a degree in medical science, quite a few of the causes of death, the ordinary Joe public wouldn't understand what that actually means anyway. So it was only whenever they got the registration stage and the registrars explaining what the causes of death are on that medical certificate cause of death, that's never come, oh yes, he had that. And that will still be the case in this system, because the medical registrar, or the registrar registering the death, goes over the causes of death that are mentioned on the medical certificate. And if a family do have any issues, or there was something on the medical certificate that shouldn't be on it, the registrar would still be flagging that up as they would do if they had the physical copy handed to them.
Oh, thank you. It's good to get a bit more information around that. Thanks very much. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, and you said, just I'll bring in Paul for you. Just what is it? You mentioned about the delay in England in general, or there being a gap. Is that because just over here we tend to have funerals a bit quicker, basically?
There's an independent medical examiner now in place in England, and that is causing severe delays.
Is it cultural that we would probably have? I think I'm right in saying, I think we probably tend to have funerals a little bit quicker.
Yes, we would, yeah.
Generally, yeah.
Yeah, but again, we would be working over weekends and stuff like that. Our medical certificates would be issued a Saturday and a Sunday. Okay. Over in England, they don't. No.
Okay,
no.
That's interesting.
Yeah, thank you.
There are a lot of reasons, I think, Chair, why there are delays, but the new medical examiner system, which was brought in last year, has definitely added to all of that.
Okay.
And that's something that all stakeholders right across the death care pathway are looking at very, very closely, and I'm sure at some stage it'll get sorted out. But generally, there's lots of reasons why there are delays. But one of them is cultural.
Yeah,
I think one of them is cultural. Certainly in Northern Ireland, the time between death and funeral has always been quicker than elsewhere in the UK.
Okay, that's helpful. It was just to clarify that point, Paul Frew.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. Thanks so far for your questions or your answers. Pretend that I know nothing about death registration and medical certification. What is the difference between a medical certificate of death and a death registration?
Okay, so the medical certificate of cause of death is issued by the GP or the doctor who has treated the deceased before they've died, and on it they will state the causes of death on that medical certificate of cause of death. Once it is then handed to the registrar inputs that information along with the deceased details and the next of kin details, and they produce a certified copy of the death certificate as such. And it's just, so the actual death certificate is a certified copy stating the causes of death, but it also has a wee bit more detail in so much as the next of kin, or who the informant is who's registering the death, and the deceased details in full.
So you need a death medical certificate before you can register?
Yes, you need the medical certificate of cause of death.
Right, okay. And if you dispute the causes of death, and we know there are a number, you can have a number of deaths, can that either medical certificate or death registration be revised after the fact?
Yes.
What's the explain to me the processes of that.
So again, quite often what will happen is, and you see it quite often with junior doctors especially, who don't really have an awful lot of medical experience, but the most common cause of medical certificates being changed would be because a broken bone or a fall has been mentioned on a death certificate. That is 90% of death certificates that have to be changed. That is the reason why, because the doctor has put on that the deceased suffered a fall and broke a hip or broke a leg. And if that's the case, and that's been a contributory factor in the deceased's death, because obviously if somebody's elderly, has a fall, and is off their feet for any length of time, their general health declines, and that could be a contributory factor in their death. The coroner then gets involved, and the coroner then would issue the relevant paperwork for the funeral to go ahead. Mm-hmm. That happens in 90% of what needs to be changed. Families can dispute what a doctor has put on a death certificate, but if it is clinically proven that that was a factor in the death, or that was what the person was suffering, whether family like it or not, that needs to remain on the medical certificate, because that is their cause of death or a contributory factor in their death.
When and if a coroner is involved in a death, and that won't be in all cases.
No.
How long does that prolong the process, one of burial and two of registration?
Doesn't. Well, it doesn't prolong the funeral in any way, because our coroner system's very efficient in producing the paperwork. Mm-hmm. In relation to getting the death certificate, it could delay for a fortnight or 3 weeks before the family would get a certified copy of, or be able to register the death to get a certified copy of the death certificate.
Do you see, and again, we all sort of know politically that this is a very positive step, and we've all been pushing for it to be on a statutory footing, a permanent statutory footing, as opposed to the Coronavirus Act, which is a temporary measure. But have you seen any sort of peculiar or new trends of complaint, given the electronic version?
No.
No, none at all?
No.
Okay, that's a very positive and reassuring thing. Can I ask you about the issue? Sorry, Nick, were you wanting to come in there? No?
Oh, sorry. So, yeah, sorry to interrupt. I really, just on that final point, if I may, right across England, Wales and Scotland, there hasn't been either. So this is just to broaden that issue out. Systems that have been using it permanently now for some time, and countries that have been using it permanently for some time rather, again, there just has not been any kind of issues to which you allude. So it's not just perhaps a Northern Ireland thing, it is the experience of other countries as well.
Okay.
Thanks.
There would have been an issue around, and again, when somebody loses a family member, it can be, obviously it's shock trauma to all that family. But during COVID, there was an issue where sometimes people really objected to their loved ones being a statistic. So if you died and you had received a positive test for COVID 28 days prior to your death,
it was mentioned. Yeah,
it was mentioned on the death certificates. How prevalent was that argument or that complaint during COVID pandemic times in Northern Ireland?
I don't think it wasn't until afterwards, Paul, that the trauma of it all came out, and people were sort of living day to day, and the anger that people felt, it wasn't so much at the time, it was afterwards, because if COVID was mentioned on the medical certificate at all, that was a closed coffin.
Yes.
And like the people didn't die of COVID. They had COVID, as you say, within the previous 28 days, but it wasn't COVID that killed them. They had cancer, for example. They had other medical issues that actually was the cause of death, and all them people were denied a proper funeral. And loved ones, weren't able to grieve properly. They weren't able to have all the and it was only afterwards that the scale of that came out, and the trauma that has come out from that has been. And us as funeral directors, we live with the trauma daily, because I was having to say to families, no, you can't do this, no, you can't do that, no, you can't do that. And that went against everything I've ever done in all my 32 years doing this job, you know what I mean? And I was having to say to people, you can't view your loved one, you know. And what brought it home to me was a 92-year-old man, no family other than his wife, and his wife was dying in the Ulster Hospital. Didn't die of COVID, but she had COVID before she died. And his last farewell to her was via a walkie-talkie at a door of the hospital. And then I had to tell him then that he couldn't view his wife or spend time in seeing her before and you know what I mean? I'm traumatised by it, you know. But that's an aside, you know. But I say, you know, medical certificates of cause of death. Most families will accept what the doctors have said. If it's explained to them what's on the medical certificate of cause of death, they'll not have an issue.
Given your, well, I suppose a question for you, Nick. You were able to cite legislation there through GB. You're not a legislator, we are, but have you looked at the actual bill here that we've produced here in Northern Ireland? And is there anything in the text that alarms you or worries you or questions something within it?
Well, I'm glad you're the legislators and not us. Yes, I've read through it. Yes, is the answer to that. I had read through it, and there's nothing that stood out to me particularly. I mean, I'm not a lawyer and what have you, but there's nothing that stood out to me that was anything other than A, what I would expect given the direction of travel on this, or B, that I felt was there's a glaring hole there or something missing. That said, I haven't been through it word for word with a fine-tooth comb, but I absolutely did read through it because ahead of course writing the response, which I hope you've all had a chance to have a look over. And of course, I went through it in as much detail as I could.
Yeah, and of course we'll not submerge into that world that we have to operate in. We wouldn't put that on you. We wouldn't wish that on our worst enemies. Just you guys live in the practical world and you are dealing with stress, shock, trauma, and bereavement every day. Is there anything that you think should be in the bill that's not currently in the bill? If there's something that can improve the system even more than what you guys got during COVID and now what you're getting on a permanent footing, if there's something that can be added at this stage to this bill that would make your jobs easier or more slicker or faster, is there anything there that you can think of?
Not from my point of view as a funeral director operating in Northern Ireland, no. I think, you know, the pace we're going at now is a nice pace, Paul. You know, I don't think it can be expedited any more than what we physically are without maybe taking shortcuts, you know what I mean? And we don't want to do that. You need to make sure that the process is thorough and that, you know, I mean, it ticks all the boxes, but it's done in an adequate time frame. And I think the way it's working at the moment does all that for us.
Okay. Nick, have you?
Yeah, I think no, I don't think so. It was interesting. So last week I was over in Belfast last week at the Assembly for the inaugural meeting of the all-party group for funerals and bereavement, which we used to have back in the day, and it's great to get that up and running. And we had an agenda of maybe 6, 7, 8 points and within that, some of it was good stuff, some of it was problems, I guess, and it's mostly down to delays of chapels being built at Rose Lawn and one or two other sort of delays in the system, if you like, but nothing that would be. Nobody's ever flagged up to us anything around this and around what's going to be contained in the bill, other than thank goodness this is happening, and we're really pleased that it's happening. And if we move into a slightly more sort of holistic view, in terms of not just in terms of the legislation, that is, and not just we've been talking a lot about the electronic communication of documentation here, but I think the baby loss certificate, putting that in the bill is absolutely magnificent, and you are to be wholly congratulated on that, because the system in England is still voluntary and it's been incredibly successful. I think it's a brilliant move to put it in the bill, because I think it's such an important thing for parents who have lost children to either stillbirth or in early pregnancy, particularly in early pregnancy, who might not be able to talk about it. People might not know. They don't have an avenue to perhaps channel their grief through or express their grief through either, or have anything which says this is official, this actually happened, this is a real life thing. So I think that's brilliant that the Assembly's doing that. I really do. So no, I really think that this is, you've got the important stuff in there. There's nothing in there that that certainly that I think has been flagged to us by our funeral director members that isn't there already. So thank you for doing this.
Yeah, thank you for your answers. You've brought me on to the certificate of baby loss. I know that in England and Wales it's not statutory. Again, it's not on a statute book, whereas we are putting on the statute book. There's a provision within this bill that the department may put a charge or a fee on a certificate. Now, you're probably not aware of that because it's free in England.
No, yeah.
So how do you feel about that? How would you feel that there would be a charge placed on a baby loss certificate?
I wouldn't be comfortable with it, and I would just like to know what the justification is for doing it.
Okay, Stephen, you want to add to that, or you're happy enough?
Well, I suppose I'm slightly different than Nick in so much that, you know, bereaved parents now get a grant of £3,000, which they never ever got before, for babies that pass away. Quite often, a lot of the council authorities don't charge anything for baby funerals. Most of the funeral directors don't have any charges for baby funerals, so the family are getting a £3,000 payment. You know, a certificate to mark that baby's birth, to me, for the sake of £8, £12, whatever it may be, surely a parent can pay that. You know, that's only to mark their child's death. You know what I mean? That'll be my outlook on it, but the same, maybe more hard-hearted than Nick would be there.
Well, just to stress it, it's just a provision. They're not saying that they're going to charge, and I think the department has said there's no intention to charge, but it's just having a provision in the bill. Okay.
Yeah, no, I think if I may interject just very briefly, Stephen is as always talking perfect sense and probably at a more practical level than me. I was probably talking more ideologically. But yeah, look, if there's justification for doing it, then no problem whatsoever. I think people just need to know. I just think people need to, if a charge is introduced, then if there's strong justification for doing it and people are made aware of doing it, then fine. Yeah, then fine. But I'm just concerned that at the moment it's not chargeable in England and Wales. And if you then bring in a charge elsewhere, it just can create a little bit of friction.
Yeah, of course.
If it's only £8, if Stephen seems to know more about it than I do. If it's only £8 or £12 or something like that, then yeah, okay. That's fair enough.
Thank you very much for your answers, gentlemen. Thank you.
The Deputy Chair wants back.
Yeah, and just for clarity, the funeral fund is for babies who pass away after the 24th week of pregnancy, and that's the stillbirth, whereas the baby loss certificates are actually for babies that are lost before the 24 weeks.
And after the 24 weeks, they can get.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. If members are content, no one else has indicated they wish to ask a question. So at this point, I'm going to say thank you very much to Stephen and Nick for coming and giving us evidence. We really appreciate you both making yourself available. Stephen, obviously you have a business to operate, and particularly, you know, one that is very demanding in your time, and I appreciate you dialing in as well, Nick. So genuinely, this is really important that we get this evidence on the record, and for the purpose of our scrutiny, that the public and, you know, anyone else who's engaged in this, knows that we've understood how it will affect funeral directors and bereaved people generally. Thank you very much.
Thank you. On behalf of the funeral sector, thank you for highlighting this and pushing this through, and hopefully will reach a successful conclusion. You know. Yes,
I hope so. And I hope we can. I think one of the points we will make to in our committees that obviously we want that funeral directors themselves have it communicated to them clearly following the passage of the bill that this is the legislative underpinning now, is permanent, and it's in primary law. So thank you both very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Right. Thanks, Nick.
Right. I don't think, members, we have any other particular follow-up actions that arise from that, unless anybody wishes to suggest one. So if members are content, we'll thank the National Association of Funeral Directors for their evidence, and obviously that the Hansard reporting of that will form part of our report on the bill. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to move back to items 8 on your agenda, folks. We're going to go into closed session to discuss 2 bits of bill scrutiny. It's normal practice when we discuss our committee scrutiny procedures that we go into closed session. So we're going to do that now. Are we already in closed session? Great. Thank you very much.
Senate Chamber. Sound. 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 Senate Chamber. signed, Senate Chamber, 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 signed, Senate Chamber. Sound. 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 Senate Chamber. signed, Senate Chamber, 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 signed, Senate Chamber. Sound. Senate Chamber.
And then we'll have just basically. Oh, it's like a drama. Drama.
Sorry.
The bill agreements.
I'm coming back down again.
Well, no, but that's literally 2 minutes, and then we're out. Then we're done. We're absolutely done.
Are we back in?
We're just still spinning. And there we are.
Okay, we're back in open session. Members, thank you. We had a brief discussion about handling of a couple of items to do with our bill scrutiny for 2 different bills, and also correspondence that needs to be dispatched in relation to our banking services, financial services report. Just to re-summarise decisions that we have made. First of all, in relation to the Administrative and Financial Provisions Bill and the Northern Ireland Fiscal Council Bill, we have agreed specifically that we will write to I've now completely forgotten who we're writing to after
we Chair, the agreements we're getting out of for the 2 bills that came to committee today are the call for evidence adverts.
Yes, call for evidence adverts.
The call for evidence questions themselves and putting them on Citizen Space as the medium of consultation, and to expand out the stakeholder group and agree the stakeholder group and expand it out to all of the relevant commissioners. And members will continue to suggest further stakeholders in due course. So members are content.
Apologies, I clearly have been chairing this committee for too long with the last few months. So I completely went out of my head, but I just agreed in private session. So we have agreed to do, as the clerk has just said,
for those 2 bills.
For those 2 specific bills. That does not mean, to be clear, that we have yet formally agreed to extend the committee stage, but we will come to that discussion when we return in September. The other agreement that we have reached in closed session is that in relation to yes, we'll do that. We also we also need to agree that we're going to request delegated powers memorandums from on both bills from the Department of Finance, and on receipt to ask the examiner statutory rules for advice on both. We're content with that, I presume.
The 4th thing. Thank you, Chair.
That's fine. Then, on the bill that we, on the Banking and Financial Services Inquiry, what we have just agreed is that we will send letters to 2 different stakeholders. One is the Financial Inclusion Strategy Committee, which is sitting under the auspices of the UK Government, and 2 is the Economy Department, which is undertaking a consultation on credit unions, and it's important that they get the evidence that we've gathered thus far. We have agreed both of those things in closed session. Members are content that that is a reflection of what we discussed. Excellent. Very good. Sorry, one last agreement we have to make. We're agreeing to lots of things. Don't worry, no one has to sign anything. You're not going to leave with a mortgage you didn't know about. Our members agreed that departmental officials attend the meeting on the 24th of September to provide oral briefings on the principles of both bills, the ones that we have that have been introduced. That's Fiscal Council and Administrative and Financial Provisions. Agreed? That's the 24th. Okay, great. Now we're going to go back and finish off our last couple of agenda items. First of which is any other business. Does anyone have any other business?
Just 2 seconds.
No one has any other business. We will move to date, time and place of next meeting, which is Wednesday the 10th of September at 1 p.m. in the Senate Chamber. I will now put the question. The committee is adjourned. The committee is adjourned.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members.
Yay.
Senate Chamber. Sound. 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 Senate Chamber. Sound.